today we have Karin Kallmaker. I do have a short bio just for those who are not as familiar with her. Karin has been exclusively devoted to lesbian fiction since the publication of her first novel by Naiad Press in 1989. In addition to multiple Lambda literary awards, she's won an Anne Bannon Popular Choice, multiple Goldies, and has been selected as a trailblazer by the Golden Crown Literary Society. The California native is the mother of 2 all grown-up kids. She loves coffee, Tim Tams, and ice cream, not necessarily in that order.
I can be bribed with any of those.
And chocolate's not even on that list.
And Cheryl, moon. Go for it. Cheryl had said that every time I said the word moon, she was going to have chocolate ice cream.
Oh, nice. All right. Is anybody else doing a participation game as part of their? No, okay. So we are partly here to talk about Painted Moon, which was just released. Was it last month? Month before?
The 25th anniversary edition, last month.
Right, last month, yes. The 25th anniversary edition of Painted Moon, which was originally published in '94. That sound right? Okay. Yep. Karin, am I correct that you have a short reading for us to start with?
I do. If that's how we want to start, I can do that. Look, I'm all ready. I'm a professional actor. This is from, I forget which chapter in the book because I changed the chapter numbers, so I'm not as familiar with the new numbering. But it's early on. They've just had their Thanksgiving dinner, and the moon comes out and outside, and they go outside. Lee pushed her plate away. I'm stuffed. I need to walk this off. Thanks for the great meal. The gravy had made her tongue do flip-flops. She had made a pig of herself, and it had felt good. Thanks for hauling me out of the snow. Jackie smiled, and Lee couldn't stop herself from smiling back. Why don't we clean up the mess I've made? One last thing. Lee looked down at Butch, who had not moved from her side throughout the meal. Don't get used to this, girl, she said as she set her plate down on the floor. It took Butch 5 seconds to clean it, including a small dab of yams. She looked up, eager for more. Jackie laughed and set her plate on the floor. After cleaning Jackie's plate, Butch correctly surmised nothing more would be forthcoming, so she wandered into the living room. Leah dried the dishes as Jackie handed them over. They were finishing up when Lee saw a light gleaming down through the kitchen window. What's that? She lifted the blinds to peek. It's the moon, Jackie said breathlessly. There's a break in the storm. They wrapped themselves in their jackets and went out on the front porch. With a bark of delight, Butch launched herself up the slope, disappearing from sight as she sank into the fresh powder. With a yelp, she leapt out of the hole she'd made and into a new one and on up the hill. Jackie clambered after Butch and Lee followed. They'd be wet through in a few minutes, but after being cramped inside all day, it felt good to be out in the bracing cold. For a few minutes at least. With a hoot, Jackie threw herself on her back into the snow. Oh, this feels great, like feathers, perfect powder. She clambered to her feet again, a dusting of snow over her hair and face. She threw herself in another direction. I've been inside offices too long. The air is like wine. She hooted with delight and spun around in the snow like a child. Lee stood frozen, her fingers itching. The top of her head felt as though it was burning. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a faint blue over the snow, across the ground, on the tips of the dark pines. Jackie was etched in cerulean. Her braids spun in the light, and her face reflected the moon's glow. Her cheekbones were dusted in blue celeste, and her chin was a blur as she threw herself into another drift of the silver blue snow. Lee whirled and stumbled back into the house and then into her studio. She shoved some blank canvases out of the way, chalks, sketch pad. She rushed back to the porch, out into the snow, then onto her knees. Jackie had stopped her playful attack on the snow and looked at Lee in concern. Keep playing, Lee said. Ignore me. Jackie started to say something, but then just smiled. With another shout of glee, she launched herself yet again into a snowdrift. She was a mosaic of blues and whites. Silvers edged around her skin. The brilliant amethyst of her jacket framed the planes and curves of her figure. She played for several more minutes, throwing snowballs at Butch, who barked and tried to catch them, then refused to jump at more. They sank into the snow, breathing hard. The moonlight abruptly winked out. Well, that's the end of that. Jackie's voice floated down to Lee on the whisper of the breeze. It's snowing again. So it was. Wispy snowflakes floated down like tiny handkerchiefs. She stood up, feeling dizzy. Her knees ached with cold. Are you okay? I was concentrating too hard, I guess. I'm fine. Well, let me give you a hand. Jackie reached for Lee's arm. Butch exploded out of the snow, her bulk throwing Jackie Lee the sketch pad and pencils in different directions. The sketch pad landed closest to Jackie. She snatched it up out of the wet. Jackie was looking at the topmost picture. It's okay. She carried it carefully into the light of the porch. This is beautiful. Lee reached for the sketch pad, but Jackie ignored her. She was staring at the drawing, then up at the hill. Yes, it does look like that. The moonlight is both hot and cold. There you have it.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Thank you.
That was awesome. I don't know.
I'm wondering how many people first read Painted Moon 25 years ago versus just read it new this last couple of months.
Who remembers this?
Yes, I read that. Yes.
That's a dog.
And for any of the folks who read it first 25 years ago, did you find yourself thinking different things with this reading? I'm reading the chat, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I'm trying not to read the chat.
It's all right, it's my job. Anyone with thoughts about reading it in the last century as opposed to now?
This is Carlene. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Thanks, Carlene. Hi, Carlene.
Well, I didn't read it in '94 because I hadn't discovered Lesbic at that point. Although Karin Kallmaker was my introduction to with one of her other books. But I've told Karin this before. I'm holding my copy of Painted Moon. It's a Bella. It's a Bella. The Bella publication. The purple cover that I absolutely love.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't dog ear pages because I think that's heresy. But it's a well-read book. This is one of my comfort books.
Yes.
So I read this quite a bit over the years, and I recently, of course, got the 25th anniversary edition. And I mean, on the highest level, it was just a really, really lovely journey back to the story.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a very lovely journey back to the characters and to the images. And I think as I've matured, I've also come to appreciate the writing in it more. And especially since the comparison between the two, because I did do, like, the first few chapters, I literally did a side-by-side comparison to see what they were. Well, because I was fascinated by that. And one of the things I noticed is that the love of the story remains. But I think it's even more heightened because the language now has been tightened, you know, and things like that. And the thing I really noticed about it that I love is how the language that is used for each of the characters fits that character so beautifully. You know, Lee Beck is the artist, and so it's all about colors and textures and, you know, all that. But then when you've got Jackie over here who still has that artist sensibility through her family, but she's more of an architect. So she's her world is a little bit more angled, a little less, you know, kind of blended, if you will, in the language. And I really appreciate what you did with that, Karin. I think it's really a beautiful way for that language to just pop off the page.
Yeah, and I did most of it on purpose.
Well, I kind of figured that. But, you know, and other people can agree or disagree with me, but just as kind of a person who just, like, reads, just like, I just want to soak it up. The first time we soak it up, we don't notice those kinds of wonderful little details. But then when we go back and we attend to it, we go, so that's what she did. Oh my! And that, I think that's what brings it back to Karin Kallmaker's The Queen of Lesbian Romance.
Okay.
I'll shut up now. Other people?
Well, part of it, when I read, I taste words. I'm aware that I'm sort of flavoring them, and so I'm kind of when I create a character who doesn't think the world that way, I try to use the language that suits them. And some characters don't have that strong a passion about a thing that draws them to have their own language. But like musicians, they are speaking two languages almost all the time in their head. And so it affects the way they take things in. It affects the way they express themselves. So I've written different ways that works for musicians and for artists and even chefs, because, passionate about something is food counts. Ice cream.
Would anyone else like to chime in? Any thoughts about that?
Well, I had noticed the same thing. This is Anne. I had noticed the same thing, and I wasn't, because I didn't sit down and do a side-by-side comparison because I was listening while I was winging my way across Michigan or someplace. But the colors, the fact that she talked in colors so much, it was so, I absolutely loved it. And I wasn't sure whether that had been in the first version, despite having read it probably 10 times minimum. So yeah, I loved that piece of it. I'm with Carlene on that.
Most of the changes I made that were not like the structural changes where I made shorter chapters instead of having scenes within chapters, because that's how people really read now. I did very little adding. There were places where I specifically added a thought where I went, oh, that thought belongs there. And so I added that, but I didn't like tweak sentence by sentence, except to remove things. Like, for example, at the time it was written, I wasn't thinking about the audio sound of it and a potential audiobook. That was just something you didn't do in the 90s because cassettes and all of that expense. So this time I was aware of the fact that it would be an audiobook. And so I wanted to make a few changes because of that. And a lot of it was just taking out the word said. And instead so you take out the she said, you put a period at the end of the sentence and blend into whatever that sentence was that came next. So there's a lot of that throughout. And I was amazed at how just tighter it felt just for that. And it lost a few words along the way. But for the most part, if I added something, it was a pretty big add. I fixed a few things.
I was going to say, there weren't a lot of big ads, though, were there?
No, not really. Just the occasional thought where I went, how did I miss that? How did I not say that? Well, maybe because at the time I was 26 and now I'm not 26 anymore. So things caught to me. One of the biggest additions is I think it's at the end of now, chapter 22, which would be after when Lee goes into the closet she has a meltdown and drags a blanket in the closet and stays there. And at the end of that scene, I added that one of the reasons she kind of realizes she can't stay like that is that she hears the dog on the other side of the closet door. And that's not in the first version, but I've been around dogs more and I understand that's exactly where the dog would be, on the other side of the door from her person, waiting for them to come back out. Back when they get over doing that weird thing they're doing. So that's one of the largest ads, and that's just like 4 or 5 sentences.
I remember reading the Butch scene, in this case the dog, the Butch scene at the closet, going, oh, of course, Butch gets her out of the closet. What did you find? I found myself when I was reading thinking very much of that time frame, of that, right as Clinton is elected and things. There were so many things. For the first time, we actually had a president who managed to say the word gay and lesbian.
Yeah.
And
I mean, we were a decade into the AIDS epidemic, and this was the first time a president actually said gay and lesbian.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and I think too, just that realization of how far we've come in 25 years in terms of, though it's not impossible for it to happen, I think the outrage for an artist of Lee's renown to have experienced that in regard to her late partner people would have been up in arms, and I don't just mean the community today.
Yeah, there would have been a Twitter movement and all sorts of pressure, which doesn't ever change the law itself. If the law still said what it said back in the early 90s, which is that you have no relationship and your family can take everything, or your dead partner's family can just take everything.
Yeah. Next of kin. You weren't kin.
And you weren't kin. Yeah. That was the gay 90s.
And this is Carlene again. Karen, I think the changes that you made, that there were subtle changes that I know your intention was to kind of place it in a, like you were just talking about, in that particular period of time. I thought you were very successful at doing that. Because even the first time that I read it, I was new to being out and all the other good stuff. So this stuff wasn't forefront in my mind like it is today. And so reading it then, I was like, well, oh, of course. But if today was the first time I read it, I would go, wow, whoa. But you put it in such a very context that it works so beautifully, and it makes it almost a little piece of our cultural history purposefully, which is lovely.
I was writing and I wasn't thinking about it being a piece of cultural history.
Exactly.
And being something, I mean, I was trying to express the times as I experienced them living in the Bay Area. And you write what you know. So I wanted to capture that so that other people elsewhere, when they read it, would know what that life was like. But looking back at it 25 years later, I was really seeing how much it captured that sensibility of the gay 90s. So I did a little shoring up to make sure it felt like it was set in that time period, deliberately, because you don't do that when you set out to write something in the contemporary now. In fact, you avoid it. You okay? You avoid unnecessarily dating, avoid things that set so that when a reader immediately goes, oh, this is old, when you're writing something in what's called the contemporary now. So I really wanted to make sure the readers, if they said, oh, this happened a long time ago, and that would give them the right mental framework with which to look at the story, especially the early part of the story.
Are you planning to go back and update any of your other books, or was this a one-off for 25th anniversary of Painted Moon?
Well, I've asked myself that question. This was successful for a lot of reasons. Partly just because the story has a true timeless quality. It has many favorite things that we still like in romance novels that are very true. And so I've looked over my other books and I'm not sure I want to touch them and do the same thing with them. I look a little bit at Wild Things, which is a couple years later. The political world has changed so much since then that it could almost use that framing. The idea of an out politician running for a really prominent public office in a place like Chicago would have been a big deal then. And so some of it feels a little dated, and why is she so scared? Well, if you understand the times, it becomes more obvious. And so it, again, doesn't have that statement of times in it. But so far, that's the only one that I feel like a reader could maybe use a little different perspective at the outset in order to come to this story more freshly. But this one seemed like the one that just spoke to me and said, yeah, I need a little tweak, and new readers could find the story and wind their way into it. And who is that, by the way?
That was Karen Richard.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Another Karen.
Hi, Karen. This is Julie.
Hi, Julie.
I love Snowden romances, but I was wondering, of all of your books, which one would you love to see turned into a movie?
There are the discussions, and the ones I would like to see versus the ones that practically could, in a practicality sense, could be, are probably two different lists. I think, for example, paperback romance has all sorts of artistry and wonderful visual moments, and it would cost a fortune to produce. Because you would need a couple of full symphony orchestras, and you'd need to rent out some really, really expansive concert halls all over the world. And I would be happy to go along and consult. As I dream. So there are stories that I don't think are just practical. Maybe next time's another one that involves a musician. You'd need a world-class violinist to play your lead, or who could fake it very well. Again, not all that practical. Making Up for Lost Time was inspired by a movie and has a lot of things about it that it could be a movie. It's a farce. It has only a couple of different sets. It's very much an interior kind of story. All the action happens inside buildings as opposed to being out of doors often. And I think it's inherently funny. There's a lot about it that's just funny. So I'd like to see that in particular. I think it would play well. And the story itself is one that could be told in a 2-hour or hour and 45-minute block. Short stories are often the best things to be made into movies. Stephen King has proven that over and over again.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Stand By Me, Shawshank Redemption,
Is there one of your short stories though that comes to mind? If that's
Unbeliever would be one. That's a novella, but
yeah,
again, it would make, I think, a very fun movie, very close up and personal movie, and again, it would be it would have the interior view of looking at the characters, since they're all, it's the kind of story where everybody stands close to each other and has lots of feelings.
And again, I think Because I Said So would be a fantastic movie. I think it would be, I mean, you've got a diversity of characters, you've got the tragedy of, oh, we just missed all those years ago. You've got blended families, you've got dreams delayed, are they denied? I mean, there's just so much going on with Because I Said So. I think that would make a fantastic movie. But I don't know, what do I know?
From your lips to the goddess's ears.
I'm going to put in my vote for Captain of Industry. Unsurprising.
Movies.
Bravo.
And I'm going to put in my vote. I'm going to put in my vote for Love by the Numbers so I can have a cameo.
Oh, well, yeah. It would be you and Waddy.
yeah.
Yep.
And you'd have to go to a beach. You'd have to go to Brighton Beach and, walk around and speak in English accents.
I'm cool with that.
Okay, cool.
So Beth brings up long-term lovers. I think we should mention the short stories that are included in the anniversary edition of Painted Moon in terms of long-term lovers, learning that Leah and Jackie are still together and how things have progressed. What was it like writing those two? Now, I know the one was written, for Frosting a few years ago, but revisiting their personalities and how they may have grown, and how did that feel?
I was amazed when I reread the original book. All of the details of their characters I'd forgotten. I'd forgotten that one of Jackie's primary reasons why she sort of didn't realize maybe she might prefer women was that she wanted to have a child, and that was a big deal to her. It comes up over and over again, and it never. When I was thinking about the short story I wanted to write, I didn't stop to think, oh, did they have kids? If they had to have had kids, it would have been so important to Jackie. And I never said Leah was opposed. Like a lot of lesbians in the gay 90s, they were thinking, well, kids aren't a part of the deal. They're just not.
Right.
And then others of us were going, well, yeah, they could be. So then as soon as I thought, well, if they had kids, what would those kids be like? What would their names be? So I named them after an artist and an architect. If you were thinking it was Lynn Manuel Miranda, maybe, but no, it was after Maya Lynn, the architect, and George O'Keeffe. And so what would their kids be like? Who had the kids? What are they like nature nurture wise? How did that change their lives in some ways? And that also gave me a chance to look at Leah's unhappy family upbringing. How would she be as a parent, and what would her neuroses be around parenting? And are they different from Jackie's, who's such a light person who sort of bounces into situations and looks around and goes, how can I make it better here? And that's just the way she is. And it's not the way that Lee looks at the world at all. She is a little more, how can I keep things from falling apart here? And so the two different people, but so I got to play with that. And I had to think about, oh, well, Butch wouldn't be with them anymore. And so I wanted to be sure to say, you know, that they've continued to have a Butch in their life, which is part of it. So it was picking up lots of threads, and that I'd forgotten many of them. There's a lot of other characters running around my head now. Back then I could hold a whole book in my head at once and not ever have to look anything up. And I rarely forgot their details. I didn't have to consult a cheat sheet. And now I got cheat sheets everywhere. And I mean, it's really bad.
Well, and you mentioned the parents. I remember being aware of it the first time I read it, and that it continues in terms of, in my view, and maybe this wasn't what you intended, but not just the discussion of the difference between what accepting parents look like and those that did not. Just the idea that there was an example of accepting parents, and that too was part of the validation of the romance. I don't know if other people felt that way.
This is Maria. I was gonna bring up that point too, with the differences in the parents, but it also kind of shows the differences in the main characters, where Leah is more reserved and more afraid to tell her feelings and true feelings, and Jackie, though she's kind of cautious of how she's approaching Leah, because she's trying to figure out her own, in my opinion, figure out her own feelings herself. But she's so open with her mom and open with everyone and honest. You know, I really loved how honest she was about everything and just didn't hold back, you know, just what she was really feeling in everyday talking about her sexuality. It was just, okay, this is how I am now. And that's why I and comparing their parents, I also compared their relationships with their parents and how they were with each other, kind of matched. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Well, and do you think a piece of that too is reflected in Leah's just a little bit older? What is she, 8-9 years older? And that's another example of things changed in that decade too. You know, as I look back now, every 10 years, it's like, my goodness, who would have thought we were here? Who would have thought? So they have that influence as well.
Yeah, that decade, a lot of stuff happened in that decade before the book took place, and Leah's outlook on the world would be very different. Wow, if you weren't alive then, it's really hard to explain how it just felt like the shutters were falling off the world, one by one, in pieces, and that change could be so possible and so close. Other kinds of change, you know, we're still waiting for, but that visibility was a change that was happening, and it was happening all the time. About the parents, you know, most of my friends did not have good relationships with their parents. Those that were out, you know, dealt with some discomfort and did not go home as often as their other siblings, and faced still, you know, negative interactions with their family around the holidays. They dreaded the holidays. And I really did want to have a character who showed that as uncommon as it may be, supportive parents, everyone has a right to expect that.
Mhm.
And that was just one of those driving things where I said, I want an example of someone who has positive parents in their life, and that's how this is supposed to look. And this is what kind of person you might be that's different from how you are. And it's not to make someone angry about how their parents are, but to say, okay, maybe I didn't get the lucky draw with my parents, and I can recognize that it's had an effect on me. So not that, I write romances to be psychotherapy, but that was just one of those, well, maybe I do, where I just wanted to have the contrast between the two things, because love conquers many things, and sometimes it's filling in for love that should have been there and wasn't. I think that kids today, especially, would be more quick to say their parents' approach to their sexuality is not, it's not desirable, it's not right, and to resist rather than internalizing it and saying, oh, I've made my parents unhappy. That there's a huge difference. And so if that's one of the things that those of us who are older can think of, that we've given the generations behind us, it's that they can expect, and they have seen around them examples of good family relationships and positive interactions at school, that they have a right to expect respect from their teachers, and they have a right to be not bullied, and that the world can look that way for them. So, that's, at the time I was writing it, there were no children in our future, but as it turned out, I was modeling a little bit the future I wanted my children to inherit eventually. We're not there, but we'll get there, I hope.
Hi, Karen. This is Marianne.
Hi, Marianne.
And Jackie really intrigued me, and that she had so many realizations. First that, well, I don't know if it was first, but the one where she realized that her boyfriend wasn't the best guy in the world, and that and I was just curious, do you think that that it's different today, that she would be different today, with those realizations, that they would have come faster maybe? Or what do you think?
Well, I have to tell you, it's harder and harder to write a book where somebody is later, has made it through college even, and it never crossed their mind.
Right, yeah.
And it has literally never crossed Jackie's mind.
Yeah.
And only in retrospect does she look back at her close friendship in college and go, oh, oh, maybe there was something going on and I just didn't recognize it. I just didn't look for it. And I hate to say kids today, that sounds like I'm, a boomer. Kids today, the younger people, they're in a world with so many possibilities, and their eyes are already open and looking around, which is what we wanted them to have. And yet at the same time, my generation, we fought to be able to say lesbian out loud, and to have people say it and have it not sound like a swear word, and for homosexual to not sound like it's about sex, and be embarrassing and icky. And my kids are actually of an age where all of those labels, they don't want them, because they find them oppressive and putting on identities they haven't yet explored. So they got the world I wanted for them, and at the same time, I'm dealing with my own feelings of, but lesbian's an important word, and we really struggled and could just suffer just a little, and that, they're doing their own thing, they're suffering their own way, they're fighting their own battles. It's not a bed of roses for them either. It's just different. We have our own little diaspora going on. They don't speak our language and don't eat our food, but we hope they come home for dinner.
Well, yeah, it is so different now. I was at a meeting last night with teachers, and I've been retired for a few years, so I was listening to teachers talk about how kids are coming out. And when we were coming out. We had gay, lesbian, there was just a small vocabulary, and now the vocabulary has just exploded. And
Yeah.
there's so many different options, and it's so wonderful.
So many ways to be validated, and
right,
so
yeah,
how you feel is fine. It works for you, and it makes you happy. That's great.
exactly, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Thanks.
Thanks for being a teacher.
There we go. Were you going to read from one of your short stories with?
Oh, yes, I could, if that would work. Does anybody have any other questions? I'm looking at the time too.
This is Karen again. I just had one quick question before you go into your next reading, and that is, can you share what you're working on now? What do we have? Can you give us a little peek ahead?
I will do that, but let's do that at the end, so it doesn't.
Oh, perfect.
I'm going to save that
Thank
for,
you.
icing.
Yeah, because it's fun. It involves the word douchebag, and I'm so pleased with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to read from Living Canvas, which is the new short story. The short story in between is Smudges, which I wrote for a Frosting on the Cake collection. That would have been it was for NIAID. So before 2003 was when I wrote Smudges. And it's in the present tense. It's a very different. And when we were preparing this edition, I was, one of the things that I suggested was the way that there's a firm break between the end of the novel, and then there's a blank page, and then a contents that says here's 2 stories, because if you thought that was the next chapter, Smudges is really jarring, because the style is very, very different. But this is in normal contemporary now kind of story, and for the Captain of Industry fans, this story picks up the evening of after the initial party in Captain of Industry, when Lee and Jackie are going back to their hotel in Los Angeles.
Because they're at the party, right?
They've left the party, and they've just landed on top of their hotel in Los Angeles via helicopter, which everybody does in LA apparently. I've never done it, but you just flit from place to place by helicopter. Sounds fun. So they've just arrived. The percussive whump whump of another helicopter arriving matched the beat of the techno dubstep pulsating from the hotel's top floor nightclub. It was a relief when they left the day's heat still rising from the roof for the air-conditioned confines of the hotel. "Come dance with me," Lee said suddenly. She tugged on Jackie's arm. "We're all dressed up." Suspecting they wouldn't last for even one song, Jackie was still happy to spend a few minutes swirling around a dance floor in Lee's arms. It didn't matter that they were the only people dancing. It was a weeknight, and nearly everyone else was a male businessman looking exceedingly bored, tired, or both. Jackie saw her amusement reflected in Lee's eyes. 2 50-plus women in a posh neon nightclub definitely brought the hip factor down to 0. Out of breath and pleasingly dizzy, Jackie relaxed into Lee's arm as the music segued from one ear-punching song to another. "Let's go see how Georgia is doing," Lee shouted. "I bet she's gone through all the popcorn." Lee fanned herself on the way to the elevator and shucked off her dapper suit jacket. The enclosed space reminded Jackie via her nose that her silk caftan had to go directly to dry cleaning. She'd been so excited when the auction closed that her toast of celebration with Lee had sloshed wine back on herself. What a waste of an excellent Ardani vintage. She smelled popcorn as they approached their room. Georgia had definitely been snacking. What more could any teenager want? A hotel room, room service, a microwave, and high-speed internet. Heaven on earth. Georgia's long, lanky body was sprawled across one of the beds. 2 open textbooks were alongside her, and a notebook was balanced across her knees. Dishes and glasses were on the table, along with the room service tray, with a still neatly wrapped napkin, and topped by an empty microwave popcorn bag. Another bag of popcorn, still half full, was next to her on the bed. "You guys are back already? Oh, I didn't realize how late it was." Jackie surveyed the sprawl of the contents of George's backpack across her bed, the table, and some of the floor. How did she do that and so quickly? She gestured at the floor. "I gotta walk here." "Sorry, Emma. I was going to clean up." Georgia paused, Captain Marvel on the TV, and wiped her buttery fingers on her jeans before gathering some of her belongings and piling them haphazardly on her bed. She scooped the dishes from the dinner onto the tray they'd been delivered on and covered it all with the fancy cloche. How was the party? Jackie opened the door so that Georgia could set the tray in the hallway for pickup. The party was fabulous. Great food, really smart women, my favorite things. Lee loosened her tie with a deep sigh of relief. Best part was this actress tripping, and I guess it's called a wardrobe malfunction. Let's just say there was nothing fake about her assets. Mom, are you objectifying her? Her shock was palpable. It totally sounds like you are objectifying her. I totally am. Gross. Lee laughed. Made you say it. It could be worse. Jackie fiddled with the inner tie that pulled the caftan waist tight, but couldn't get it loose. We could be online looking for pictures that people took. Ew. Georgia flopped back on the bed. Jackie said to Georgia, and Mom's sculpture sold for $260,000. The auction was thrilling. That's a record. Georgia gave another squeal as she bounded back to her feet to hug Leah. Jackie was still grinning as she went into the bathroom for a quick shower. Georgia lived at the end of her feelings, completely contrary to what Lee called her laconic DNA. They had a long-running joke about both kids. Was this trait or habit due to Leah's DNA, or was it Jackie's surrogacy and nurturing? The intensity of the argument usually depended on how much trouble the child was in. Regardless of whatever she and Leah agreed on, Jackie knew perfectly well where Georgia's forgetful squalor came from. She'd seen Leah in the throes of creative passion too often not to trace that apple back to the mother tree. It was still a little too soon, but they'd had to say goodbye to Butch the second 2 months earlier, and Jackie missed having a dog in the house. There was also the simple truth that while a human being might fear to break Lee's concentration, Lee didn't mind a dog leaning against her legs and whining for a walk. She'd suddenly realized the time and that she was hungry and didn't wonder how the door to her workshop had opened or why Jackie was saying, "Good dog," and giving treats. The tie on her caftan was now a knot. She stuck her head out of the main room, interrupting the ongoing debate between her daughter and Leah about Wonder Woman versus Captain Marvel, which was more inspiring or feminist or had a better score. Seriously? Georgia paused the movie. Amazon costumes are so much better. Not a single bare midriff for boys to drool over, for starters. Captain Marvel doesn't have a bare midriff either. Yeah, but there's just one of her. Jackie interrupted with, I need help getting this thing off. Be right there. Leah turned back to Georgia as if to continue the argument. Jackie loudly cleared her throat. I'd like help now, please. Besides, you're not going to win on costumes. Sorry, Amazon's in leather and boots. Ass-kicking boots. I'm just playing devil's advocate. Be right back. I want to see the next scene. Leah joined Jackie in the bathroom. How did she get so obsessed about movies? I haven't a single clue. Jackie sneezed nature into her hand and squealed when Lee tickled her.
Thank you.
That was great.
So I tried to cover all the bases there.
Awesome.
That might be a debate my partner and I have about our kids.
I can't imagine. Yes.
Yeah. You know, if they do really well in school, well, then that's, you know, nurture. So any other questions about anything at all, actually? You can ask me anything. Favorite ice cream, favorite Tim Tams, coffee.
I have a question, Karen. Do you have any specific rituals when you're sitting down to write those hot sex scenes that you are so well known for?
Did you say specific or sadistic?
Specific, but you know, you can take that however you want.
Because actually sitting down to write a sex scene is kind of sadistic. There's a lot of self-torture involved, and I mean that actually in the mental figurative sense, because it would be really hard to, you know, anyway. I don't. My approach to writing sex scenes, they're hard. I don't think anybody finds them particularly easy. If you're writing erotic all the time, it's, you know, all muscles are easier with use. And the language of it might flow a little more easily, but I try to always use sex scenes to advance the story. So I have to keep the threads of the character in the scene, which makes them often very slow going. Also, a quote from the movie Roxanne, when Steve Martin is pretending to be the boyfriend. It's a take on Cyrano de Bergerac. If you haven't seen it, it's great fun because of all the wordplay. And one of the things that he says is, how can I use normal words to describe you? How can I call you beautiful? People call shampoo beautiful. So trying to search for fresh words and inspiration and things that haven't been said before, it gets harder and harder, especially the more widely you read. You go, oh, now this sounds just like that other book that, you know, it just sounds like 8 other books I just read. How do you keep that fresh and different? And that's another reason to stay really tight with the characters while you're writing it, because if you've got unique characters, then the way they experience sex and the way they share it will be unique to them, and have at least some hope of not seeming like every other sex scene somebody's read in all of the other books. No, I don't torture myself, but I know it's going to be torture.
Thank you. That was a great answer.
That leads me to another question, Karen. This is Carlene. How much do you read? So I know that there are a lot of people who will say, I don't read because I don't want my writing to be influenced by what I have read. So how much of that do you read? I know when you were editorial director, you had to read every damn thing, but now obviously you don't have to read every damn thing. How much do you read?
Well, you know, that's a really great question because it has changed. If I'm in the hardcore throes, oh, that sounds so naughty, of writing a story, I tend not to read much of anything unless I'm really looking for a break, or I have, I'm on vacation and I have, I want to read. But it's not for worried that I'll take something from someone else and it'll influence me. I'm very spongy. I sponge everything. Everything I read ends up in the soup, and then I ladle out what's my unique part of that. So not for that. It's that I might get engrossed, and then I'll remember things about their characters and that story, and I'll forget. It's like my brain can only hold so much, so it'll be like I'd have to download or offload some of what my project is in order to take really enjoying someone else's work. The exception to that seems to be mysteries, because I don't have a chance in anything of ever writing a mystery. Hats off to those of you who do. And so it's not the same thing. It's not the same muscle at all for me to read a mystery and to write, what I write. So I'm able to do that. So I read a lot of mysteries of all sorts, because I think reading is essential. It's just, you have to read if you're going to have the muscle memory and the vocabulary and the words there to just be. It's like listening to a lot of music. If you want to come up with your own melody, it's good to have heard a lot of melodies. And so reading is like that. It's just, you have to do it. So I don't read as much as I'd like, though. That's for sure.
So we have a question from, thank you, Karen. We have a question from Cheryl, who wants to know if you use beta readers, and if so, how? I
do not use beta readers. They didn't exist when I started writing. That was just something nobody did. You might have a writer's group where you and 4 or 5 other people met and shared work in process, and you would bounce ideas maybe. But I never had that either. I wrote all by myself in whatever space I carved out of the house with me and my little tiny Mac Plus computer. And it was just me. I had a double disk drive. I was high-end stuff. I'm talking, yeah. Dual floppy disk drive. Ooh.
Absolutely.
Living high. And before that, I had an IBM Selectric with the, interchangeable ball.
I was going to say, how many fonts did you have with that Selectric?
I had 3 different balls, 2 of which I had liberated from their workplace. So, so that, but I wrote in solitude. I read a lot. I had, social interaction with people, and I wrote all by myself. So I have never gotten in the habit, and it would feel really weird. I think just to my process, it would probably be really disruptive, although there are probably things that I could benefit from using beta readers in a very specific way. I can't imagine being one of the kinds of writers, and I know there are very famous writers who do that. They write a chapter, throw it to their beta readers, get feedback, and then they write the next chapter. I can't imagine ceding that much control to anybody else. It's my world, and I'm making it, and you can tell me all your thoughts about what you think, and I'll just nod and smile. So I've never done it. I have a project underway that I might consider asking a couple of people to read it before I let it go much further. And mostly it's just because it's something a little different, and I want to be sure it feels a little different. So, but yeah, I've never worked well with beta readers. It's actually kind of causing me some anxiety to think about it.
So you brought up, is that your current work in progress that you might ask someone to review?
No, it's a different project that would be a series that I'm working on. So that's part of it. It has an unusual frame, which I think is brilliant, of course. And it's that idea that there's this unusual aspect to it that I would want to get a couple of different opinions on before I, not that I'm going to change a word because, I'm just going to do this while they talk, but actually I'm really good at taking feedback after I get past my own ego of putting it out. I actually like feedback a lot. That's, and I don't know, maybe getting feedback before it's published would make sense. Gosh, why would anybody do that way? I don't know. It's just not the way I ever interacted. It's a strange new world with all these highfalutin gadgets people have today. But I do have, we are almost up on it, aren't we? Let me grab this.
One question before you do that. Carlene wants to know why the city in Painted Moon changed from Bishop to Bridgeport.
I looked at a map. Actually, I was really aware of how easy technology has made getting certain details perfectly right. And I realized as I read through the sequence of her driving, I was using paper maps that didn't have elevation, the real impact of elevation. And so I was estimating. It was a drive I had made as a teenager with my parents, so I hadn't paid that much attention. And I realized that the way I described the journey is the way no one in their right mind would have gone. Now that I, more experience of the world. So I drew a slightly different path, and it corrected the time flow, it corrected the directionals, it corrected everything. So that's why I changed the name of the city and made a few other minor descriptive choices, like even then she wouldn't have driven through Yosemite Valley, and I think I implied that she did. So I corrected and fixed a few things like that. But yeah, okay. I actually looked at a map, a new map, a Google map where you can actually see things in the way. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. With our last minutes, your work in progress?
My work in progress. This is really short. It's just a couple hundred words. I'm working on. It's called Simply the Best, and the shortest way to describe it is dating myself by saying it's kind of a mashup between Born Yesterday and The Devil Wears Prada. I bet somebody knows both those movies. And so we have there's our ingenue love interest in this little short snippet is the journalist who's arrived to look at well, I'll step back and make it easier. This is something, see, I didn't practice, and so I'm wondering. Anyway, New Yorker and a science reporter, her name is Alice Cabot, and she called a climate change denying local congressman a douchebag. And so she's been reassigned from science to style and been told she has to get out of Manhattan for a while. So they've sent her to New Mexico. The congressman was indeed a douchebag. She regretted losing her cool. Ed hadn't told her she had to apologize, but she would do so in the morning regardless. It didn't matter that an elected official paraded his corrupt and self-serving ignorance. She was a journalist and she knew better. New Mexico. And no one but herself to blame. She'd been there for anniversaries of atomic blasts, the non-event to storm Area 51 because the truth was out there, and the University of New Mexico's release of carbon dating and plate shift modeling that suggested the ages of Earth epochs were off by hundreds of millions of years. All she remembered from the airport in Albuquerque to any destination was sand, scrub, and loss of signal.
Oh, boo.
At a good bar with local brews, wines, and liquors near the embassy suites. Was it Albuquerque or Dallas where she'd hooked up with that bartender? Honey blonde hair, long legs, and an appetite that had kept them up. That was all before the Janet debacle. He was pretty sure she was on Janet's list of huge mistakes I've made, the same way Janet was on hers. That was that. It turned out being alone was better than being alone with someone else. New Mexico. She was exiled to New Mexico to make nice with people who sold unprovable assertions and wrote about their company with new age word salad. Stealing herself, she went to simplythebest.com. Right on the homepage, quantum crystals. They were using quantum as if it meant shiny. How is she going to survive this without calling someone a douchebag? So that's our journalist.
Awesome.
I love New Mexico, so in New Mexicans, don't worry. I'm not. Your state's going to shine.
All right.
Quantum Lee.
Quantum crystals, yeah.
Is that going to be available at conference?
That's our hope.
Awesome.
Just confirmed the schedule earlier today, so yay.
Oh, good.
I'm excited.
Thank you so much, Karen. That is our time. So,
This is Maria. Can I ask one really quick question? It's very important. I need to know. Do you prefer ice cream or gelato?
Well, it depends on where I am and how hot it is. Need a whole lot more ice cream if it's really hot. You need it, but if you're in Italy, for God's sakes, have the gelato.
Oh, I was drooling over all those photos you were putting up. So.
It's my favorite thing to be an expert in ice cream.
That's like the boxers or briefs questions of the Lesbian Book Club, right? Gelato or ice cream is the boxers or brief questions of the Lesbian Book Club.
Yeah. And should you be lucky enough to know the difference?
okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Happy holidays,
Karen.
everyone.
Thank you
Enjoy your
so much.